In this video, we're going to be taking a look at absolute value. Now you'll need to turn your Go Math book to page 19, get out your math journal, and a pencil. Now the essential question that you can see on the top of page 19 is how do you find and use absolute value? So let's look at the Explore activity number 1 on page 19. It says the absolute value of a number is the number's distance from 0 on a number line. For example, the absolute value of -3 is 3 because -3 is 3 units from 0. The absolute value of -3 is written just like this. You can see the two brackets that are around it with -3. So once again, absolute value, take a look at 3. It's 1, 2, 3 places away from 0 on the number line. So the absolute value is 3. So moving down, because the absolute value represents a distance, it is always non-negative. So in other words, even though it's -3 is the number, we're just looking at how far is -3 from 0 on a number line. So let's take a look at this next section here. It says graph the following numbers on the number line, then use your number line to find each absolute value. So we'll take a look at -7. We'll graph this, and I want you to do this with me. So we'll graph 5 on the number line. We'll graph 7, -2, 4, and -4. Now taking a look at A through F, we're taking a look at the absolute value. Why do we know it's absolute value? Because we can see the two lines on either side with the actual number stating we need to find the absolute value. So what's the absolute value of -7? We think about the distance from -7 is from 0 on the number line, and we can see the distance is 7 from 0, so absolute value is 7. Letter B, what's the absolute value of 5? 5 places from 0 on the number line, so 5 is the absolute value. Letter C, what's 7 on the number line? What's the absolute value? You can see the distance is 7 from 0 on the number line, so it is 7. Letter D, -2. What's the absolute value? It is 2. Remember, absolute value is always non-negative. In other words, it's never a negative. It's just how far is it from 0 on the number line. Letter E, 4, +4. So we take a look at +4. It's 4 away from 0 on the number line. Letter F, -4. So 4 places from 0 on the number line as well. Okay, so we can see all the absolute value for letters A through F. Now let's take a look at this next problem here. Analyze relationships. Which pair of numbers have the same absolute value, and how are these numbers related? So we can take a look at the numbers numbers in A through F. So we can see -7 and 7 have the same absolute value, so A and C. We can also see +4 and -4 have the same absolute value. And how are these numbers related? We know that these numbers are opposites. Okay, so numbers positive and negative that both have the same absolute value are opposite numbers. And I want you to write this down in the reflect section there under number 1. Now let's take a look at number 2. It says justify reasoning. Negative numbers are less than positive numbers. Does this mean that the absolute value of a negative number must be less than the absolute value of a positive number? Now remember what we talked about. Absolute value represents a distance. It is always non-negative. So we can see the answer to this, and I want you to write this down on page 19. So the answer to this is no. -7 is less than 3, but the absolute value of -7 is greater than 3. The distance from -7 to 0 is greater than the distance from 3 to 0. So just remember, we're finding absolute value, and absolute value is always non-negative. Now I want you to turn to page 20 in your Go Math book, and we'll take a look at absolute value in a real-world situation. And at the top of page 20 it says, in real-world situations, absolute values are often used instead of negative numbers. For example, if you use a $50 gift card to make a $25 purchase, the change in your gift card balance can be represented by -25. Let's take a look at example 1. Jake uses his online music store gift card to buy an album of songs by his favorite band. Find the negative number that represents the change in the balance on Jake's card after his purchase. Explain how absolute value would be used to express that number in this situation. So let's take a look at step 1. So it says find the negative integer that represents the change in the balance. So we can see -10, the balance decreased by 10, so use a negative number there. And then we can also see the balance went down, so the change is a negative number. Step 2, we'd use a number line to find the absolute value of -$10. So we can see -10 is 10 units from 0 on the number line. So we can see the absolute value of -10 is $10, or we can see how the absolute value equals 10. So the balance on Jake's card decreased by 10. So let's look at the reflect for number 3. It says explain why the absolute value of a number will never be negative. Talked about this a little bit earlier in the video, and I want you to write this down. The absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on the number line. Distance can never be negative. Okay, so in other words, even though we start with -10, the distance is 10 units. Okay, it's not -10 units, it's 10 units from 0. So distance is never negative. Okay, I want you to turn to page 21. Let's take a look at the top question, number 4. It says the temperature at night reached -13 degrees Fahrenheit. Write an equivalent statement about the temperature using the absolute value of the number. Okay, so remember, absolute value only ever deals with distance. Okay, so absolute value is always non-negative. In other words, it's always just going to be a positive number there. So we could say, and I want you to write this down for number 4, the temperature at night reached 13 degrees Fahrenheit below 0. You can write that down for number 4. Now let's take a look at some other problems, and what I want you to do for this section, it says find each absolute value, so I want you to complete number 5 all by yourself. Okay, and you should have 12 for the absolute value. Let's take a look at number 7. I want you to complete that one all by yourself. And you should have 55 for your answer. And then I want you to complete number 9 all by yourself. And for number 9, you should have 88 as your answer. Now let's take a look at comparing absolute values, explore activity number 2. It says Maria, Susan, George, and Antonio checked their credit card balances on their smartphones. The amounts owed are shown. Now what you'll have to do is answer the following questions, and we can do this together, and when we've finished, we will have enough clues to match each smartphone with the correct person. Now, something that's important to remember, when someone owes a positive amount of money, this means that he or she has a negative balance. So taking a look at letter A, like I said, we'll go through these together. It says Maria's credit card balance is less than 30. Does Maria owe more than $30 or less than $30? So for letter A, we know that Maria owes more than $30. Next one, letter B. Susan's credit card balance is greater than -25. Does Susan owe more than $25 or less than $25? And this is less than $25. And you can write that in here. Just remember, when someone owes a positive balance, a positive amount of money, this means that he or she has a negative balance. It's important to remember that when we're dealing with this situation here. Letter C. George's credit card balance is $5 less than Susan's balance. Does George owe more than Susan or less than Susan? So if it's $5 less than Susan's balance, what he does is he owes more than Susan. letter D. Let's take a look at this. Antonio owes $15 less than Maria owes. This means that Antonio's balance is, we can see that this is greater. And just think about if somebody owes less money to somebody, then obviously they wouldn't owe as much. Okay, so next thing what we want to do for letter E, it says write each person's name under his or her smartphone. So we can see based upon all these questions that we answered, we can see Susan owes $20. We can see George owes $25. We can see Antonio owes $30. And finally, the biggest balance is Maria owing $45. So let's take a look at number 11. It says the absolute value to describe the use absolute value to describe the relationship between a negative credit card balance and the amount owed. So what we see is the amount owed is the absolute value of the balance. Now what I would like you to do is complete number 3, letter A, all by yourself. And your answer should be more than 100. Now what I want you to do is complete letter B, all by yourself. And your answer for letter B should be less than Leo. Now finally, I want you to complete letter C, all by yourself. And your answer for letter C should be more than 50. Now to wrap up the video, let's take a look at our essential question. And it says, when is the absolute value of a number equal to the number? And the answer to this, and I want you to write this down, is when the number is non-negative. So this concludes the video on absolute value, and if you have any questions about this concept, please come and see me.